thanks very much for being here. I know we're winding down. I can feel the energy is starting to wind down too, but we're here, so thank you for coming and for your attention. Just to walk you through my agenda for what I'd like to do today, I work at Penn State University preparing teachers who are going to work with English learners, bilingual learners in K-12 contexts. And so I'm going to say a few words about the social need of the issue that I'm concerned with and that we respond to as teacher educators, and then touch a little bit on sort of the expanding knowledge base that is required for teachers working with bilingual learners, and then a little bit of pointing to a little bit of a perspective shift which echoes the plenary speaker, Joan Kelly Hall, some of the things she had to say, and what we just heard also in the last session. I'll explain a little bit of my theoretical commitments. In this presentation, I'm going to pull on or sort of draw from two different research studies that I've been involved with. And they're both actually two different pedagogical interventions to assist teacher learners to develop intercultural competencies and understand sort of the state of being multilingual. So I'm going to pull on the findings from both of those studies and try to bring that together for you. And that's the emergent themes from the data, and I'll give you a taste of the data and then talk a little bit about implications for both research and practice. So as you all know, K-12 classrooms in the United States are increasingly more diverse. One of the things that's changing really in the last 10 to 20 years is that not only in places like Arizona, which has a very long history of multilingualism and biculturalism, multiculturalism, and the urban centers where there's always been migration and influx of people that speak other languages and cultures, but also in places like central Pennsylvania, in rural areas of the South, in the Midwest, we're seeing more and more teachers are working with classrooms that are multilingual and multicultural. So the other issue that we face, the challenge really for teacher education, is that many teachers come to this experience of working with multilingual, bilingual learners without a large knowledge base of their own life experience of being multicultural or being multilingual. And one of the other things that we see is that the teacher learners themselves, the pre-service teachers, as they move into their classrooms are saying, we need more understanding, more experience, more of our own life experience, but also pedagogical tools to be able to support English learners in classrooms. One of the other things that makes the challenge even greater, as if it needs to be greater, is that there also is now a call that all teachers need to have some preparation to understand multilingualism in public schools. So the question is, well, what do teachers need to know in order to be effective as teachers in the 21st century? I'm going to intersperse my talk with some pictures, sorry to go back. And as I mentioned before, I'm drawing on two different research studies. One of them is a pedagogical intervention that we've created at Penn State where we're taking teachers to Ecuador for a culture and linguistic immersion and field practice teaching in the summer. So it's a 5-week experience. This is some of our teachers working with the Ecuadorian learners in the classroom. The other research project I'm going to talk about is a on-campus student partnership between my teacher learners and a group of English learners from the intensive English program, a group of international students. So I wanted to draw attention to these ideological shifts or perspective shifts that are happening, and I think we already heard in different talks over these last few days a rethinking of language. So one of the things that Joan Kelly Hall brought up is sort of the difference in thinking about traditional ideas of language as grammar and structure and a bounded system, to begin to think about language and culture as usage-based and as developing and emerging in social practices that we have throughout our days. The other idea is that as we think about bilingual learners in public schools, that this ideology that exists in the United States of monolingualism sort of gives us this idea that learning always happens in English. Well, in reality, we can value the learner's primary language and culture and build on those primary language and literacy skills to develop proficiency in other languages and cultures. So to bring our thinking, our perspective from monolingualism as the norm to ongoing and natural spaces of dynamic bilingualism. There's a quote there from Palmer and Martinez that says, "It is our contention that an exclusive focus on bilingual students' needs and the related methods and strategies for addressing them normalizes monolingualism and diverts attention from some of the more pressing challenges in educating these learners, challenges that lie not in the learners themselves, but in the language ideologies and normative discourses that permeate classroom schools and the surrounding society." So in a parallel way, I think we're also seeing in thinking around intercultural competence and interculturality that there's a little bit of movement from the very detailed and useful framework that Byram and others have developed to thinking about interculturality and interculturality as being something dynamic, that it's about positioning and negotiating that individuals do in different time spaces, and it's about identification, also otherization that happens often without our being aware of it, and then representation, which can happen at the individual level, but also through the media, in text and instantiated in lots of different ways. So Dervin and Holliday are two writers that have been useful to me in thinking about that, as well as Claire Kromsch. So to go back to the research and actually my practices as well, which are sort of two very parallel and interrelated activities, I think about, stay up at night, wondering about how can I help teachers build a complex understanding of bilingual language practices and the dynamics of intercultural interactions. In other words, how can I help teachers how can I make visible what it means to do being bilingual and bicultural? And particularly in situations with a lot of the groups that I teach now on campus are undergraduate pre-service teachers from Pennsylvania. It's a large state university. Many of them, again, are female. I'm in the College of Education, female, monolingual. They have not had many extensive experiences themselves with thinking about language or thinking about their own sort of cultural identities and diversity within themselves. So another picture of a group of students in Ecuador learning how to make cornmeal, grinding it on a stone. So the two experiences that we've looked at, the first, the experience abroad, which is a 5-week-long experience, although the program actually begins this semester before, so we have the advantage and privilege to begin working with a group of students in a course in the spring semester, and then we spend most of the summer with them. 5 weeks are actually in Ecuador, but there are courses before we leave, course sessions, and when we get back. The data I collected was 10 pre- and in-service teachers, and then the second, what should be number 2, is the students that are partnering, pairing, and we've linked 2 different courses. So a university English as a second language course in the intensive English program, and my group of pre-service teacher learners. So to give a little bit more detail on each of those experiences, I've written and talked about each of these in different places, so I won't give you a full picture, but just a summary. In Ecuador, the teacher learners take a course on second language learning processes, second language acquisition, on culture and ESL ways of teaching English and content to bilingual learners. So there's a teaching practicum that's set up that they engage in while they're there. They're observed, they get feedback, they develop lesson plans, etc. They're actually studying while they're there either Spanish or Quechua, which is the indigenous language of that region. And there's a cultural inquiry project where they choose a topic and interview people. We help them with ethnographic data collection. They live with a homestay family. And then to the second intervention or the second project, the student pairing, there's actually in this semester-long course, there's two different projects. The first one is the pairing with the international students, and so the students meet outside. We first have one group meeting where both classes come together and we get to know each other. I'm working closely with the ESL instructor. And then the students are paired. Last year it was groups of 3, so 2 international students and 1 US student, and they meet outside of class once a week. It begins as sort of getting to know each other, sharing experiences of their lives of being at Penn State. And then as time goes on, we ask them to begin to discuss some of the topics that we're talking about in our respective classes. The ESL class is also a content-based class focused on culture, and my class is a pedagogical, an ESL certificate class about culture and language. And then they're writing a blog. So the data looked at the blog entries, the things that they wrote about. One of the most important things about this experience is towards the end of the semester, they begin to work on a research project and actually as a group develop a poster. And then we have a sort of a public poster presentation where people come and they explain what they've learned. So that's one part of the course. The other inquiry sort of project that's part of the course is that they go through this process of writing their own cultural autobiography. Then they interview a cultural other and write that person's biography. So they interview several times during the semester, write that up. And then we spend time in class helping them to analyze the 2 different sort of artifacts, the 2 different lived experiences of themselves and another person. So there's a lot of comparison, cross-cultural comparison that comes of that. So again, just to be explicit about the learning goals of both of these projects. One is developing intercultural competencies so that students can identify their own cultural subjectivities, recognize other cultures, and use that to be better teachers. The other important thing is building linkages between their life experience and the partnership, what they hear about their partner's life experience, and the concepts. So it's also very important, I think, that we're teaching concepts, conceptualizations around culture, around multilingualism, around bilingual language practices in the class, and that then they're able to see those instantiated in people's life experience or their own. And then the last point is recognizing the impact of culture and languages in the classroom, in teaching. Sources of data. With the partnership, with the on-campus experience, we analyze blog discussions, their reflective essays, and the work that they did in the autobiography and biography. Part of the plan was to interview students, but that in this first go-around, which was kind of a pilot study, we didn't have the chance to do that, but obviously that would be very interesting. And I'm also thinking how we can collect more interactive data so that it's not just coming from one voice or one representation, but what's actually happening in those meetings, or thank you, as they do their projects, do their research, and do their poster presentations. And then the field experience abroad involved interviews, journaling, reflective writing, and observations and lesson plans from the practice teaching. Unfortunately, I don't have time to give you a thorough explanation of cultural historical activity theory, but I used activity theory to try to sort of uncover both the individual learning experiences and also the collective. So what was happening in the system, in this bounded experience of a group preparing to go to Ecuador, learning about things that have to do with culture and language teaching, and then actually experiencing it. So sort of bringing together the private and the social planes. Activity theory is based on Vygotskian sociocultural theory, and again on ideas that our learning does not take place in our heads, in our minds. It takes place through the activities and actions and thoughts that we have with other people, and always mediated by abstract and conceptual and also concrete things in the world. The data, so that was sort of a heuristic, and then the data, I did a grounded content analysis, sort of trying to understand what was coming out of the data that might reveal the learning process. So what I tried to do here is to bring together just some of the themes, and I'm really here focusing on the idea of interculturality. So the themes, there are 5 then, and the middle column is those that came from the field experience, sort of a little more of a description, and then the last column is the on-campus, the student partnerships, that project. So just briefly to go through the first one, there was clearly shifting social identities, individuals beginning to reconsider who they might be. In the first instance of being abroad, a lot of dissonance that has to do with being in a completely unknown cultural linguistic landscape. And many of the teachers don't have Spanish proficiency or much Spanish, or not a high enough level that they can feel confident in everyday interaction. So there's a lot of emotional and cognitive dissonance that happens with that, which I can see sort of brings about a little bit of a shifting from this is who I am to looking at, well, who might I be in this situation and what does that mean for my future? And in the second case, the second project, more thinking about professional identities. How do I move into being a teacher of bilingual learners? The second theme was complexity and sort of the dynamism of cultural identities. That was not a significant theme in the field experience, and I'll mention that later, but it was in the student partnerships. And then 3, building awareness of our own cultural identities. 4, developing relationships and direct experience with lingua or lingua culture. And 5, the emotional work of learning another language and culture. What I'd like to do now is just give you a taste of the data, and for number 2, the text that's in color, from the project on campus, Cultural Identity, Involving Agency and Choice, Hybridity and Dynamism. So this text excerpt, these are all pseudonyms, is from a student who is writing in her cultural analysis paper about interviewing a Mexican student, and after she had written his biography and done sort of an analysis. And so she says, at the most basic level, John and I differ culturally because we were raised in different countries with different native languages. However, while I originally thought this would be a blatant difference between us, I actually found that there were several similarities between our childhoods. We both come from conservative families who hold to certain traditions and live in small towns. Neither John nor I wanted to stay in the sort of secluded environment our towns provided, and both desired a more urban lifestyle. This connection has really made me see John not as a Mexican, but as a member of our modern society in which cultural globalization and expansion are making us more eager to reach out past our small home community and become global citizens. So I think you can see that she's beginning, initially she came to this thinking, well, he's going to be Mexican, I'm American, these essentialized notions, we're going to be very different. But as she goes on, she writes more about how Mexican friend decided that he wasn't really Mexican, that he has lived here in the States for several years, and that how he saw his own cultural identity as being very hybrid, and that was something that she talked about. Then number 4, looking at number 4 and 5 from the field experience abroad, the importance of relationships and developing relationships among people. And I know that in this case, it happened in personal space, but I think it can also happen in virtual space. And then also the authenticity and the importance of negotiating meaning and the emotions that come from that. So 2 more data excerpts. The first one, the student said, "The first night in Otavalo, the incredible experience of being left in a foreign country with a family that I didn't know, with all my American friends somewhere else, hit me like a ton of bricks in my gut. And I'm an experienced traveler and an adult, and I was going home in a month. It made me hugely sensitive and compassionate to what students must feel when they immigrate." And then the second one, another student talking about being with her host family. She says, "It was the conversation, the authentic conversation, that gave me a chance to practice my Spanish, correct myself, learn new words and phrases." And then she says, "We were not only talking in Spanish, we were exchanging information." So I think you can see how for her, being with the family, being in a place where she wanted to communicate her thoughts and feelings was critical. So a few implications. I have just a minute or 2. One is the actual experiential learning that happens with being around people that are culturally and linguistically different. The instruction of concepts, conceptualizations, and then connecting that to lived experiences. The mediation that happened through students talking to each other on blogs or in class, with instructors learning from their peers, from host families in Ecuador. A self-awareness of cultural identity, and also, and I think this is also critical for K-12 teachers, building an awareness of global social structures and what we call ideological clarity, or understanding sort of the inequities that are implicit in the way that society is structured and things happen in schools. And so some programmatic changes. We came to see that it was really important for all along the way for teachers to begin to think about their own individual motives and goals as they go through the program. Developing the expectation that cultural learning is a lifelong sort of learning process. And I think one of the things that we struggle with still is how do we make visible the multilingual, the language pieces of it. There are lots of things that we can bring that come from video or from experiences talking with people, but seeing that in Pennsylvania in the classroom is a challenge because it's not a multilingual community. So that's one thing that I still need to put a lot of energy and thought towards. Also, looking forward to research and practice is a question: what are the factors that allow some learners to grow and others to resist? And then how enduring is this learning? Can we see that this continues, and what kind of data will show that? Thank you.